Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for our event co-sponsored by U Alumni Relations, the LGBTQ Resource Center, and the Salt Lake City Alumni Club. My name is Eric Boscan, and I'm a member of the Salt Lake City Alumni Board and the LGBT alumni community, and my pronouns are he, him, his. We are fortunate to be joined by Shelby Hearn, they, them, she, hers, who is the coordinator of the education and outreach at the LGBT Resource Center. Shelby joined the LGBT Resource Center staff in October 2019 after receiving their MED from Loyola University Chicago. They facilitate the Emerging Student Leadership Program, develop educational materials and resources on LGBTQIA+ topics, and facilitate workshops and trainings for campus and community partners. Their professional interests include blending student development theories into a holistic practice, advocating and supporting underserved student populations, and fostering inclusive and radically welcoming campus environments through community building and education. Thank you, Shelby, for being here.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I'm really stoked to be here to chat with y'all a bit about the LGBT Resource Center. So I'll go ahead and pull up some slides that I have to share with you all. So as Eric said, my name is Shelby Hearn. I'm the coordinator of education and outreach for the LGBT Resource Center here at the University of Utah. And as that bio noted, I've been here for almost a year, give it a couple of weeks, and I'll hit my 1-year anniversary as a part of the University of Utah and being a part of the LGBT Resource Center. Before I was here in Salt Lake, I was in Chicago getting my graduate degree in education. And before that, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, but I've really loved being a part of this stellar community here in Salt Lake City. And so I'm so fortunate to have been invited to speak with y'all about the LGBT Resource Center, specifically in the ways in which we've been supporting LGBT students and maintaining community during COVID-19 and the university's responses to COVID-19. And so that's what I'm going to talk to y'all a bit about today. To give you an idea of where we're going with this conversation, I'll talk a bit about the LGBT Resource Center in general, kind of give you the overview that I essentially normally would to anyone about kind of our work during precedented times. And then I'll chat a bit about COVID-19's impact specifically on LGBT students, either through things that I know anecdotally from the students that I have directly supported since spring of 2020, or because of the ways we know COVID-19 specifically impacts LGBT populations and just our student population at the University of Utah as a whole. And then I will go over the ways in which our office has adapted to continue to meet our students' needs. And I will discuss some ways in which alumni can get and continue to be involved with services that our office provides for our student body. So, the LGBT Resource Center, you all are meeting me, the coordinator of education and outreach, but I would be remiss if I didn't get the chance to talk a bit about our other phenomenal staff. And so our full-time staff includes Dr. Claire Limke, who is our director, and our executive secretary, Bree Peacock, who I work alongside of. And those are our full-time staff. We're really incredibly lucky to have 3 full-time professional staff members supporting students. And then we also hire and have on student staff in part-time roles. So currently we have a graduate assistant. Her name is Jessica Hernandez. Jess takes part in our academic mentorship, our famtorship opportunities, as well as other community building work. And then our 2 student staff are Moani Tuitapoe and Trey McEwen, who also take the lead on a lot of our community building and facilitating conversations amongst our students. The LGBT Resource Center itself, the ways in which we've come to really talk about our work is through our 5 pillars of leadership development, education, community building, student support, and advocacy. And so we have all sorts of different programs or ways in which we provide resources for students under these different pillars. So education looks like the trainings that I provide for faculty, staff, and students on campus about gender and sexuality, but also looks like our Queer Conversations series, where students and faculty and staff in our community can kind of have some more inter-community and niche conversations. So most recently, we had one about what students never learned about queer relationships and sex ed. So that was a really good partnership that we did with Center for Student Wellness and Education. Leadership development looks a bit like the program that we have called Emerging Student Leaders that I facilitate in the spring. It's a semester-long program where LGBT students get to really kind of queer the idea of leadership and talk a bit about the ways in which their leadership styles or their identities as leaders on this campus and beyond intersects with their identities as LGBTQI individuals. We also provide leadership development through a volunteer program and through our student, staff, and part-time employment programs at our office. Direct student support is probably our most robust pillar of work in which our staff does a whole lot of different things to directly support students, from anything from having one-on-one conversations with our staff, typically with me or Dr. Lemke, to connect students to other resources. So we are often doing warm handoffs to other offices on campus, like the Counseling Center, like the Black Cultural Center, like the Victim Survivor Advocates. And those students might come to me or Claire to discuss something that they're experiencing on campus first because of our like identities, and then we can do a warm handoff to other resources on campus if students need it. Student support has also looked like financial support out of our office through our scholarships program and through our emergency funding, which funds anything that's non-tuition related that might be impacting a student's ability to attend classes, be on campus. Our community building work is either from smaller events like our weekly Fab Fridays, where students just gather from 3 to 5 on Friday afternoons for it's really kind of an intentional invitation, to come into our space and to be in community with one another, meet other folks, play board games, and then occasionally we have a slightly more structured ones that are called Very Fab Fridays that have been things like Queer Jeopardy. Our upcoming one this week is a murder mystery party. And so those are a little bit more structured Fab Fridays. And then we also have our bigger community building events, which you might be familiar with, like our Pride Week, which this year is officially beginning to take place annually in the spring. So Pride Week 2021 will take place in the spring semester. And that is, a week-long worth of community building and educational programming that the entire university really comes together to put on and celebrate LGBT identity, culture, and history at the U. And then our advocacy work is a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that Bree, Claire, and I are always doing, the different tables that we sit at in the university to make sure that queer experiences and queer student voices are always a part of the conversation when it comes to policy creation or changes at the University of Utah. So that is as quick of a summary as I can give of all of the different types of work that our office does and the ways in which that we kind of approach meeting student needs. Now, since COVID-19 in March of 2020, our office has seen a lot of those needs for students change or become more pronounced in certain ways. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the ways in which COVID has directly and uniquely impacted LGBT students at the University of Utah. So a big way that we've seen this impact is through a lack of in-person community. We know from research that LGBT students really need good networks of community, need to be able to be in community with one another to really thrive on a college campus. And when spring there was a forced campus closure in spring, that in-person community experience was very suddenly taken away from a lot of students. For some LGBT students here at the University of Utah, on-campus community is one of the few places in which they can feel that they can engage safely with other LGBTQI folks. And so that campus closure greatly impacted that ability to be among other like-minded and like identity folks. Going forward, we still have limited in-person gathering, both on campus and off campus in Salt Lake City and surrounding Utah areas. Online classes has also impacted a student's ability to, again, feel in community with other folks. And our own lounge has remained closed on through this fall semester. And so our lounge typically is a part of where I talk about student support, and it's just a resource for students to be able to be somewhere where they feel safe during the day. They can be in conversation with other LGBTQ folks or with our staff. So that lounge closure has greatly impacted our students' ability to find community space, which has also impacted our ability to provide support and resources in ways that we're used to being able to do so. So students can't meet in person with me or with Claire, oftentimes because when our office opens, students have most often just kind of popped their head into my office and said, hey, can I talk to you about something? Or I've overheard conversation and asked the student to come chat with me. And so that more organic way of providing resources and support for students has been impacted by our campus's limited openings. And so we're also unable to kind of create those more organic connections to other resources on campus as well. For housing was a major concern back in the spring for a lot of students, unsure whether or not housing was going to close, if they had to suddenly return home or need to find off-campus housing, if they were not comfortable returning home or just hadn't made those plans. Now there are students who either felt it was unsafe to return to on-campus housing or just were unable to return for health reasons. And so there's a common experience of students lacking privacy or safety to be able to live authentically when they're in their own homes or among family or roommates that might not be tolerant or accepting of their identities. And so housing conversations were really common in the spring and continue to be a part of our conversations in our office. And then finances, not especially unique to LGBT students across the University of Utah were greatly impacted financially, either through layoffs or drops in wages for students who worked in service industry, students who've had to leave employment because of health reasons. And then there's the cost of healthcare. And we know that because COVID impacts different marginalized communities in a greater way, the cost of healthcare has been a large obstacle for students and a concern for students as well. So those are some of the ways that COVID-19 has specifically impacted our students or has impacted our ability to continue to meet our students' needs in the ways that we're used to being able to, or to kind of our standard of care. And so since March, we've been adapting, adding to, or stepping away from programming to best meet our students' needs in these unique times. Some of the ways in which our students interact with our office has changed in a lot of different ways, and the university's changes in policy and our own students' needs as those have shifted over time. This circumstance has really asked our staff to be constantly in conversation with one another about how we can be adapting, how we can be flexible, how we can make sure that our students are still being cared for by our office and are being looked out for as things at the university continue to change. So in student support, in that vein, we immediately started talking about how students can continue to be in direct contact with our office, even if we were not physically open during our normal hours or at all. So we've provided virtual appointments with LGBT Resource Center staff. Students can still email us and get an appointment with myself or Claire, and we'll chat happily over Zoom or over the phone, whichever way a student feels most comfy. But we also wanted to replicate, again, that more organic, a student just kind of off the top of their head had a thought and they want to be able to get in touch with one of us, or because sometimes just for a lot of folks, emailing and making an appointment and going through all of those steps can either be really scary or stressful. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a easier way for students to be in touch with us. And so that's through our virtual drop-in hours that we offer 4 days a week, and that includes on Wednesdays, evening hours. So students can be in touch with us even not during the 8 to 5 typical hours. And then in the spring and the summer, our emergency funds were redirected to the university-wide COVID response fund to make sure to really kind of streamline the process of getting students emergency funding during this time. Our fundraising efforts to be able to do things like provide emergency funding, those have shifted this year. So our gala and silent auction is something that maybe you've previously attended. It's been our biggest fundraiser of the year, but COVID presented a lot of obstacles to being able to hold the event safely and continue to make sure that it was an enjoyable experience for our community and for folks who would have attended. And so we decided to step away from doing that this semester and instead direct a lot of our energy into still holding a silent auction, but holding it in the spring. So we will have a virtual silent auction February 18th to the 23rd. And so we're really excited about that particular opportunity because it does open up our silent auction and the items that are offered up by local vendors in Salt Lake City to folks who don't currently live in Salt Lake City. So any of our community members, you alumni and family are going to be able to interact with our silent auction in a way that they haven't been able to previously. And then our community building has been one of the main things that we've focused on ensuring students were still able to find community in ways that really worked for them. So on one hand, we maintained some of our usual routine by continuing to host Fabulous Fridays. We worked with the university to be able to provide online games since we couldn't host our usual in-person board games and really intense Uno matches that we were used to in our LGBT Resource Center staff lounge. And so we're continuing to provide Fab Fridays, but I really felt like we were seeing a lot of Zoom fatigue, might be something you're experiencing yourselves in your day-to-day lives since March. And so we were finding that students weren't necessarily as into logging onto Zoom in the afternoon on a Friday or for some of our other usual community events. And for me personally, I really wanted to figure out a way to recreate our physical lounge in the organic ways students were able to be in community with one another there and sharing resources, sharing experiences, talking about the professor that you should be able to take for this English course, those types of conversations that I had seen in our office space. I wanted to give a similar experience to students at a distance. And so that's where we started to create virtual community gathering space using the platform Discord. So students are able to, regardless of the day or time, they can log on to Discord and be in community with one another, chat. They share videos. We're able to use that space to recreate the whiteboard that we have in our office where we ask a weekly question to spark conversation. We have a virtual bulletin board in the space where our office makes sure that our announcements go out, but other students who are part of student organizations or for their own workplaces can also post about different events coming up, or if they're looking for a new roommate next semester, those types of opportunities. And so that's been a significant shift in creating and maintaining a space like that for virtual gathering. But it has also offered us new ways to kind of think about ways students engage with our office. Students occasionally might not have felt super comfortable physically coming into our space, and because that in a way requires outing oneself. In our virtual platform on Discord, a student doesn't have to attach their name or unit to who they are. And so there's an aspect of anonymity that creates a little bit more comfort for someone to perhaps explore a new name or new pronouns and just explore LGBT topics in general without kind of the pressure of those experiences being directly attached to who they are. That's allowed us to explore creating private affinity spaces. So right now we have private channels for graduate students to just be able to talk with other graduate students, and for queer and trans students of color to be in community with one another. Those are some of the ways that community building specifically has shifted, and I think has allowed us to really think differently and more creatively about how we provide community for our student body. Now, alumni involvement. There are different ways that LGBTQIA alums specifically can get involved with the different ways to provide resources and support for LGBT students at the University of Utah. And some of what I'll talk about is all directly COVID related, and others are ways that you can be involved kind of regardless of what's going on in the world at large. So the FAMTorship for Social Justice program is a big one. It is a program that our office participates in. It is not directly out of our office, but it is something that we feed students into and that we take part in. Excuse me. It is a program that's designed to connect undergrad students to folks who can help them achieve their academic and professional goals. You might be familiar with the term mentor or femtor. A FAMTor similarly guides students, provides experiences and knowledge to kind of help them develop as people, as leaders. This program specifically seeks FAMTors who identify as first-generation college students, low income, people of color, undocumented or documented, and LGBTQI+ to share experiences and help their FAMTs develop as leaders within the university as well as beyond. This year's cohort of FAMTors and FAMTs has already been developed, but if it is something that interests you in being connected directly to a student or two at the University of Utah, I encourage you to keep an eye out for next year's FAMTorship program. Our silent auction and You Giving Day, I mentioned in our program adaptations, but did want to bring up again that we will be having a virtual silent auction take place in February 2021 from the 18th to the 23rd. So that'll be raising funds for our scholarships program, our emergency funding, and the other types of programming that our office provides. It's going to feature items from a variety of local businesses and won't require any type of registration fee, and you can participate from essentially anywhere. We'll also be at the same time participating in You Giving Day. That's February 23rd to 24th, and that will be hosted on the university's crowdsourcing platform. So the details for both of those opportunities are going to be coming soon. And then our Cutie Sock community programming, even before COVID-19 came about, Claire and I were in conversation about the different ways that we can start better providing resources and community for queer and trans students of color. And so those conversations and our conceptualizations of that are still ongoing. As I mentioned, our Discord channel, we have a private channel for queer and trans students of color, and we're been in consistent communication with other faculty and staff at the University of Utah about what this programming can look like. So it's still in a process of conceptualizing, and it's kind of coming about as we assess the needs, interest, and COVID's ongoing impact on how we program. However, we do know that we want to be able to connect students to community members who are queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So again, if perhaps that's something that's of interest to you, our office would be really, really stoked to hear from you about ways that maybe we can put students in contact with or hear from about the experience of queer and trans people of color in our alumni communities. And then you can just kind of keep up with our office and what we have going on. So we have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for, at lgbt.utah.edu. That's our website. And you can always follow us on our different social media platforms. We have an Instagram, a Facebook, and a Twitter. Those are our handles there on the screen. COVID has definitely required us to use our social media a lot more, and we've gotten significantly more creative with the ways in which we provide education or engagement in those ways. Right now is LGBT History Month, and so I think now is one of the best times to follow us if you don't already, if you're really interested in learning about LGBT history and seeing the ways that our student staff and myself are educating folks on different ways to engage with LGBT history. We're providing recommendations on films and poetry and talking about really significant art in our community's history. And so I think our social media is really active right now, and it'd be a good time to follow what we have going on. And so this last slide here is just my contact information that you can take a quick picture of, a screenshot of, if you're interested in reaching out about any of the opportunities I mentioned about getting involved. You can also, again, find our different ways of contacting our office in general. Our general email is on this slide, as well as our phone number, and again, our social media handles. And that is everything from me.
Thank you for sharing this information with us, Shelby, and thank you for all the work that you do to support students at the University of Utah. It's greatly appreciated, and it's great to hear all the amazing things that the center is doing, especially during this unusual time in the pandemic. So we'll now answer some questions that were submitted beforehand, but as a reminder, please feel free to share additional questions through the YouTube chat. So to get started, Shelby, I do have a couple questions. It might sound a little bit repetitive, but if you wouldn't mind getting into maybe some specifics. How is the LGBT Resource Center coordinating its efforts with other centers on campus to provide more of a holistic support to students?
That's a really good question, Eric. Thanks. I think COVID has really asked us to think more intentionally about the ways in which we work in partnership with other offices on campus. An example of some work that we've done was in the spring and part of summer semesters, we did a series called Queer Care. And we did that in partnership with the University Counseling Center and the Student Success Advocates. And we were really just kind of knowing some different ways in which students might have needed guidance in how to take care of themselves during this time, as well as that was a really convenient way for us to directly connect students to those resources, the student success advocates in university counseling, and kind of get those folks' faces in front of students in a virtual way. So that was one way that we've approached it. Similarly, we've done recently, we had an Instagram takeover from the peer health educators from the Center of Student Wellness to talk about sexual health in the queer community. So we're doing our best to kind of continue to be in connection with those different resources on campus and work collaboratively in providing resources.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Another question, are there any community partners that the LGBT students and allies can engage with once they leave the University of Utah? And what does that kind of look like?
There's really an abundance of different ways LGBT folks can get involved in community beyond the University of Utah's campus. I've been, in my 1 year here in Salt Lake City, I've been consistently impressed with the amount of community organizing going on and the different ways in which I've seen LGBT leadership here in the city. So there's the Utah Pride Center is a big one, who have different volunteer opportunities, who have, they provide mental health resources for folks, and they have a variety of kind of affinity space and community building space themselves. There is in Circle, as well as, especially if you're someone who's interested in providing mentorship or resources for LGBT youth. And Circle is a youth focused organization, but they also have, again, community building for adults who are LGBTQ. So they're another resource that I'm familiar with and in consistent kind of communication with. But there's an abundance of different ways to find community. If you're really into athletics, if you were into doing rec sports at the U and you want to keep up with that, there's the Stonewall Sports League, who does dodgeball and kickball, and I think volleyball are their kind of main three sports that they involve folks in right now. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities.
Excellent. Thank you for mentioning all those great organizations. They're all fantastic, and they do provide a lot of great services and ways to get involved through volunteering across the Salt Lake Valley, especially the Utah Pride Center. I know this weekend they're having their road rally, which should be really exciting. So for anyone who's watching, if you're not familiar with that, definitely check out information on their website. Another question, what are the best ways you faculty, staff, and students can be allies to the LGBT community on campus?
I think, in my personal opinion, of being an ally to our students on campus, really recognizing and owning that it's an ongoing process. And so as much as I love doing trainings with faculty and staff, that's really just kind of one part of the whole process of educating oneself. And so I think continual education, immersing oneself in the media and the works of LGBT people to become familiar with the experiences of LGBT students, just listening to your students and what they share and the stories that they tell about themselves. There's bullet points of type of small things that professors and staff can do on campus around allowing students to self-identify and be able to put their pronouns somewhere, and that their name doesn't necessarily have to match what's on the roster officially. Those sorts of small things can really make a student feel more welcome in a class space.
Excellent. Thank you. That's good to hear. Let's see, and I don't know if we have any other questions. And then in regards to talking about support, what are ways outside of campus that people can support the LGBTQ community?
Outside of campus, folks can support the LGBT community. I think thinking specifically right now of the ways in which COVID-19 has impacted LGBT folks in Salt Lake City and Utah areas, I think providing money or volunteer services to things like the Salt Lake City Mutual Aid Fund would be really great. The mutual aid organization that buys groceries for folks who are immunocompromised and can't go to the grocery store, or people who have lost jobs and lost wages due to COVID, is a really great and important resource out here in Salt Lake City. Would be a main one, as well as getting involved with folks like the Utah Pride Center, like Utah AIDS Foundation, who provide really much needed resources to folks and who provide things like mental health and all at sliding scale costs and things like that for people, are some of the primary ways to be supportive of the community.
Okay. So it seems like we don't have any other questions. Shelby, do you have any other comments or finishing thoughts in regards to the information you presented and for the University of Utah alumni community?
Really grateful that y'all joined me for this conversation and wanted to hear a bit about LGBT student experiences at the University of Utah. And I hope that I hear from folks, or that I see that people who may not have previously known about some involvement opportunities get involved and maintain their connection to the LGBT community at the university. I think alumni involvement and students knowing and seeing themselves in alumni is just incredibly important to their development academically and professionally.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shelby, for your time. We will wrap up, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eric.